Welcome to Group 1's presentation, and this is with respect to drugs, crime and the law for Module 1. The group consists of Alexandra, John, Michael and Madison, and we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which this has been drafted and published. We have selected a news article here, almost, here, and it's been published by Monash University, and it's basically saying that it's time to decriminalise personal drug use, and it looks at the three options of prohibition, decriminalisation and legalisation. It's fairly clear that in Australia we're currently running under a largely prohibition model. So prohibition is where if you have a controlled substance on your person, you're in breach of a statute, and there will be, because it's a public law matter as opposed to a private law matter, there will be criminal sanctions to apply, be it a fine or incarceration. Decriminalisation steps it away from prohibition, and personal use as opposed to wholesale and retail is no longer illegal, but where there's an issue, at least under the Portugal model, as opposed to a criminal court, the matter is addressed in a drug court, and part of the penalty or the outcomes of the court case is not so much a criminal penalty but a rehabilitative healthcare model approach. And it's supported with a variety of different things. We'll pursue that a little later. The legalisation is an entirely different matter where the substance concerned becomes a lawfully tradable product, think alcohol or tobacco or sugar or meat or wheat. And once the product, for want of a better noun, is legal, the state can then accrue taxes. But in return for those taxes, the producers expect some sort of recompense in return for those, as a consequence of those levies, like better law enforcement or and ensuring that the black market for these commodities is indeed stamped out. We'll talk more about the California experience in a minute. So prohibition is what we do at the moment. Anything that is on the schedule under the Drug Misuse Act is not lawful, and there's penalties that apply, sometimes time in incarceration, so your liberty is deprived by the state. Decriminalisation is certainly not the same as legalisation. It doesn't legalise the wholesale use of, or the widespread use of the substance concerned, but it prevents a criminal process taking place once someone is found to be in possession for personal use, etc. So rather than a criminal outcome of a court case, you have a healthcare outcome followed by some long-term rehabilitative processes. To quickly speak to the Portugal approach, they had a massive problem, and I don't mean maybe. Before they approached it with the decriminalisation method, they had 1% of their population addicted to heroin. Now, 1% sounds like, oh yeah, not that much. When we're talking about an Indigenous incarceration crisis, we count the numbers as a number out of hundreds of thousands. So instead of 1 out of 100, we're talking about 30 out of 100,000 or 100 out of 100,000. So it's 1 in 1,000, not 1 in 100. Or 1 in 100,000, not 1 in 100 that we're talking about. So a 1% addiction rate is actually enormous. They resolved it in 10 years by taking away the criminality, having voluntary rehabilitation, and then a subsidised wage in a new job that was not involved in healthcare or teaching. Whoops. And so we've just talked about that, and the article itself actually expresses some really good outcomes there. Out of our drug offensive budget, we're spending 61% on law enforcement and 20% on treatment. If we reverse those numbers, well, if we could reverse those numbers through a change of policy, the problem would largely solve itself in a very short order of time. Just consider this as a concept. If you have a healthcare problem, would you go to a cop? No, you'd go to a doctor. Enough said. And this is the end of our conversation today. We look forward to any questions that you might have at this point. Thank you for your attention. This is John for Alexander, Madison and Michael. Good morning.